Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're traveling back in time roughly 2,600 years to a deeply fractured Indian subcontinent. So, forget the unified nation you picture today. We are going to uncover the thrilling, incredibly ruthless, almost Game of Thrones-style rise of India's very first great empire. We're going to see exactly how one single state maneuvered through this chaotic landscape of relentless rivalries to achieve absolute dominance.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the fractured subcontinent, why Magadha was unstoppable, the Haryanka dynasty's mix of diplomacy and blood, the rise of the Shishunagas and Nandas, and finally, how the Mauryan Empire begins. Let's get right into it.
Okay, Section 1, the fractured subcontinent. We're starting our story in an era where there was zero central authority, just a volatile, shifting landscape of fiercely competing powers. Picture this, an immense territory stretching all the way from present-day Afghanistan in the northwest, way down to Maharashtra in the south. This vast expanse wasn't united at all. Instead, it was carved up into 16 powerful, independent kingdoms known as the Mahajanapadas. You had states like Magadha, Kashi, Kosala, Avanti, and Gandhara, and they were all locked in this constant, high-stakes competition for wealth and land. It was literally a massive geopolitical chessboard, with every single state desperately vying for supremacy over its neighbors. You know, what's really fascinating here is that the ancient world wasn't just a monolith of dictatorships. There was actually a really interesting split in governance. While many of these states were traditional monarchies ruled by absolute kings, you also had early republican states. Places like Vajji and Malla were governed by assemblies. It just shows this remarkable diversity in ancient political thought right at the very dawn of empire building.
Moving to Section 2, why Magadha was unstoppable. Out of all 16 of those competing kingdoms, one specific state in present-day southern Bihar emerged as the ultimate superpower.
So, how did they do it? Well, Magadha's literal geography acted like a massive cheat code. It made their military and economic rise almost inevitable. First off, they were blessed with fertile alluvial soil, which guaranteed a huge agricultural surplus. You need food to feed a growing population and a massive army, right? Militarily, they were sitting on abundant iron ore from nearby hills, which is absolutely crucial for forging superior weapons. Plus, they had dense forests for timber and a steady, local supply of war elephants. Add in their control over major rivers like the Ganga, Son, and Champa for rapid transport and lucrative trade, you've got a kingdom perfectly positioned to just swallow up its rivals.
Section 3. Haryanka, Diplomacy, and Blood. This takes us right into the royal courts, where the meteoric rise of Magadha truly kicks into high gear.
The really crucial point here is that King Bimbisara, the guy who founded this imperial push, laid the empire's foundation not just by swinging swords, but by building an unbreakable diplomatic shield, step by step. Instead of exhausting his armies in endless warfare, he used matrimony as his primary weapon. He marries the princess of Kosala, which incredibly brings him the prosperous city of Kashi as a dowry. Then he marries a Lichvavi princess to lock down his northern borders and establishes ties with Madra to extend his influence way out into the Punjab. It was a total masterclass in ancient geopolitics, securing the state economically and politically before launching any major military campaigns.
But yeah, that era of clever, peaceful diplomacy, it came to a very shocking, violent end. Bimbisara's own son, Ajatashatru, seized power in the most brutal way imaginable. He imprisoned and, according to tradition, actually killed his own father. It's this dark, tragic twist that really shows just how intoxicating and corrupting the pursuit of absolute power had become in the Magadhan court.
Okay, so despite his incredibly grim path to the throne, Ajatashatru was an undeniable military genius. He completely pivots Magadha's strategy from diplomacy to sheer, unadulterated force. He fights this grueling war against Kosala and ultimately shatters the powerful Vajji confederacy. And how exactly does he pull this off? By deploying terrifying ancient weapons of mass destruction. I'm talking about the Rathamasala, which is literally a side chariot fitted with spinning blades, and the Mahashila Kantaka, a massive stone-throwing engine. These technological terrors allowed him to hugely expand Magadha's territory, fundamentally changing the nature of warfare in ancient India.
Section 4. The Shishunagas and Nandas. Because over time, the Haryanka rulers grew unstable, and succession disputes left them weak. Power was violently passed to new, even more ambitious dynasties.
Out of all this instability rises the Shishunaga dynasty. and Shishanaga steps up and achieves what previous legendary kings just couldn't pull off. He ends the bitter, long-standing rivalry between Magadha and the formidable kingdom of Avanti by totally conquering them. This was a monumental victory. It effectively eliminated Magadha's last major peer competitor in the entire region.
But as we know, empires can be fragile, like a house of cards, and internal weakness eventually caused the Shishanagas to decline. This power vacuum allowed a man named Mahapadma Nanda to seize control, founding the Nanda dynasty. As ancient texts famously declare, he was the destroyer of many Kshatriya dynasties. Through continuous, relentless military campaigns, he absorbed neighboring lands and expanded Magadha into the absolute largest empire India had ever seen up to that point.
His successor, Dhanananda, inherited all this overwhelming might, and the numbers associated with his reign, they're just staggering. He hoarded immense wealth and commanded an army so unbelievably large, it kind of defied ancient comprehension. We are talking about thousands upon thousands of war elephants, tens of thousands of cavalry, huge ranks of infantry, and legions of chariots. It was a military machine on an entirely unprecedented scale.
And the sheer reputation of this army actually changed the course of world history. In 326 BCE, Alexander the Great had invaded northwestern India and defeated King Porus. But in a brilliant twist of historical irony, Alexander's legendary, battle-hardened soldiers, the men who had literally conquered the known world, heard reports of Dhanananda's enormous, terrifying army of elephants waiting for them in the east, and basically just said nope. They outright mutinied. They refused to march a single step closer to Magadha, forcing Alexander to turn back without ever confronting the Nandas directly.
Which brings us to Section 5. The Mauryan Empire begins. Because despite surviving the threat of Alexander, hubris and heavy taxation made the Nanda dynasty incredibly unpopular with their own people, setting the perfect stage for a revolution.
Let's look at how this all builds chronologically, from the beginnings of the Haryanka dynasty some 2,600 years ago, through the strategic conquests of the Shishanagas, into the massive imperial expansion of the Nandas. We hit that pivotal moment in 326 BCE, where Alexander's forces retreat, leaving the subcontinent in a precarious state. It really shows the rapid, ruthless handoff of power that finally culminated in a massive shift just a few years later, in 322 BCE.
Capitalizing on all that widespread dissatisfaction and heavy taxation under Dhanananda, a brilliant teacher named Chanakya steps in and unites various rebel forces. He mentors a young leader named Chandragupta Maurya. Together, they channel the anger of the populace, absolutely topple the despised Nandas around 322 BCE, and establish the Mauryan Empire. This was a true turning point. It laid down the foundational bedrock for the modern state, the creation of the very first empire to truly unite most of the Indian subcontinent.
The rise of Magadha from a single competing state to the vast Mauryan Empire is a story of incredible strategy, ruthless ambition, and perfect timing. But as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a massive historical what-if to ponder. If Alexander the Great's army hadn't mutinied and retreated in 326 BCE and had instead marched east to actually clash with those mighty Nanda war elephants, how different would the world look today? Would Chandragupta Maurya even have had the chance to rise? It's a fascinating thought. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning history.